ペラペラ vs ベラベラ。
Continuing from the last time and the time before, let's delve deeper into onomatopoeia related to sounds, specifically focusing on voices, this time as well. Have you noticed that this onomatopoeia is often used when talking about becoming fluent in a foreign language while listening to Japanese? Let's try pronouncing it.
ペラペラになる。
There is another onomatopoeia related to voices that sounds almost identical to the previous one. While this one isn't used in the sense of becoming, it has a very similar yet nuanced meaning. Interestingly, there are people from certain countries who struggle to distinguish between the pronunciation of this and the previous word. As a result, they might fail to convey the correct nuance. That's why proper pronunciation becomes so important. Let's try pronouncing this one as well.
ベラベラ。
Today, let's dive deeper into the differences between these two and how they are used, and I'll touch on pronunciation briefly at the end, so stay tuned. On this channel, I, as a native Japanese speaker, share tips that may help you in your Japanese learning by highlighting common mistakes I often encounter when talking with Japanese learners. Please subscribe to the channel to increase your practice opportunities. Let's get started with an explanation of these two onomatopoeia.
ペラペラ
and
ベラベラ。
are both Japanese onomatopoeia related to speaking, but they differ in nuance and the contexts in which they are used.
ペラペラ。
Describes fluent and smooth speech, often referring to someone speaking a foreign language effortlessly or carrying on a conversation without hesitation. It generally conveys a positive impression. However, it's not always strictly positive. It can also suggest someone speaking lightly or frivolously, or even carelessly revealing inappropriate content. In this sense, it overlaps somewhat with
ベラベラ。ペラペラ。
is used as both an adverb and a na adjective. When describing continuous, smooth speech, it's mainly used as an adverb, while for fluent language use, it's often a na adjective. A key point to note is that the intonation differs depending on whether it's used as an adverb or a na adjective. When used as an adverb, it is pronounced like this.
ペラペラ。
And when used as a na adjective, it's pronounced like this.
ペラペラ。
Let's listen to both one after the other a few times. Can you hear the difference?
ペラペラ。ペラペラ。ペラペラ。ペラペラ。ペラペラ。ペラペラ。
There's one more thing I need to mention regarding the Japanese interpretation of
ペラペラ。
when used as fluent. There is one key point I'd like you to keep in mind. When you tell a Japanese person that you can speak Japanese, they often assume you're
ペラペラ。
fluent. Many hiring managers in Japanese companies also assume that those with JLPT N2 or N1 qualifications are
ペラペラ。
in Japanese. In terms of conversation skills, you need to be at an upper B2 level or higher to be considered truly proficient. I briefly touched on this in a recent short video, so please check that out as well. The onomatopoeia
ペラペラ。
is used not only in speech but also in other contexts. For example, it can describe something that moves lightly or easily, or refer to something with little substance, such as a conversation lacking depth. We'll discuss this in more detail at another time. Well, on the other hand,
ベラベラ。
refers to speaking rapidly and without restraint, often without considering the content or context. It implies non-stop chatter and is usually perceived as negative. It might describe long, aimless talk or someone disclosing inappropriate details recklessly. These nuances make
ペラペラ。
and
ベラベラ。
distinct yet interconnected in certain situations. Now, let's take a look at some example sentences. It starts with the most commonly heard phrase in Japan.
英語がペラペラだったらいいのにな。
あの人は会社のことを外の人にも気軽にペラペラと話してしまうんだ。信用ならないよ。
N2 に受かっているというから面接したんですけど、全くペラペラからは程遠かったですね。
飛行機の中で誰かが大声でベラベラと話し続けていました。それは日本語でした。同じ日本人としてかなり恥ずかしかったです。
友達は自分のことばかりをベラベラと話し続けて、私の話は全然聞いてくれなかった。
人の噂話ばかりをベラベラ喋っている人とは距離を置いた方が平和に暮らせるでしょう。
Now, let's move on to the quiz time. Please guess which of the two onomatopoeias fits the sentence displayed on the screen. And if your answer is
ペラペラ。
please also consider which intonation is closer.
ペラペラ。ペラペラ。
The answer will be pronounced with the intonation that matches the appropriate Japanese translation in the example sentences provided later.
1問目
She was asked, "Can you speak Korean?"
and she answered fluently in Korean, almost like a native speaker.
ペラペラ、ペラペラ、
or
ベラベラ。
The answer is
ペラペラ。
彼女は韓国語はできますかと聞かれ、まるでネイティブのように韓国語でペラペラと答えました。
2問目。
She says that she is fluent in English.
ペラペラ、ペラペラ、
or
ベラベラ。
The answer is
ペラペラ。
彼女は英語がペラペラだと言っています。
3問目。
Look at you, with such a never-ending stream of things to talk about.
ペラペラ、ペラペラ、
or
ベラベラ。
The answer is
ベラベラ。
あんなにベラベラと長い間、よく話すことがありますね。
4問目。
That's not something you should talk about so carelessly or blurt out so easily.
ペラペラ、ペラペラ、
or
ベラベラ。
The answer is
ベラベラ。
or
ペラペラ、
in this case, both can be used depending on the context. If you want to emphasize carelessness,
ペラペラ、
is more suitable, while
ベラベラ。
works better if it's about someone talking excessively or persistently. Ultimately, it depends on the speaker's perspective. Let's look at an example of the translation in Japanese.
それはそんなにたやすく、ベラベラと話していいような事柄じゃないよ。それはそんなにたやすく、ペラペラと話していいような事柄じゃないよ。
今日はこれで終わりです。今回の結果はいかがでしたか？皆さんの日本語学習のお役に立てれば幸いです。
And that's all for today's exercise. How did today's results stack up for you? Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.
People whose native language distinguishes P and B as voiceless and voiced sounds often struggle with distinguishing and pronouncing the Japanese P and B sounds. The same applies to the difference between K and G that I covered in a previous video. The quickest way to improve is through listening and speaking practice. In this case, P is a voiceless sound, and B is a voiced sound. When pronouncing P, the vocal cords do not vibrate. Additionally, focus on pushing the air out sharply through your slightly closed mouth, as if you're strongly pushing the air out of your mouth. However, this is not as forceful as the aspirated P. While an aspirated P can shake a piece of paper placed in front of you, the voiceless P in Japanese will not move the paper. B is a voiced sound, so you should focus on producing voice and pay attention to the sensation of your vocal cords vibrating. For P, you focus on sharply pushing the air out of your mouth, but for B, you should instead gently release the air. It feels like you are spending more time on the pronunciation of B compared to P. Let's practice.
パ、バ、ピ、リ、プ、ブ、ペ、ベ、ポ、ゴ、パ、バ、ピ、リ、プ、ブ、ペ、ベ、ポ、ゴ、や、りゃ、りゅ、りゅ、りょ、りょ、や、りゃ、りゅ、りゅ、りょ、りょ。パバピビプブペベポボー。パバピビプブペベポボー。ピャミャピュービューピョミョー。ピャミャピュービューピョミョー。ペラペラ、ベラベラ、ペラペラ、ベラベラ、ペラペラ、ベラベラ、ペラペラ、ベラベラ、ペラペラ、ベラベラ、